Hi everyone, my name is Eleanor Neil. I am a second year PhD here at Trinity College Dublin, and today I'm going to be talking about community archaeology in the digital age. I would like to begin with a quote. Gabriel Mashenska, writing about public archaeology, states that it is, quote, the place where archaeology meets the world, end quote. While this presentation is discussing community archaeology, the sentiment remains the same. Archaeology must meet the world and engage meaningfully. Long before COVID exploded all our lives and increased our digital usage exponentially, our global societies were already exceedingly reliant on the internet. While digital spaces are not always places of positive change, they have the potential to create wider accessibility and create new types of communities. With increasing globalization, the internet has become an essential tool. Communities based in digital spaces are now being normalized, and existing communities, i.e. those that were created through in-person interactions, are increasingly using the digital space to maintain connections. The internet has the possibility to support and maintain community ties and encourage public participation in the creation and dissemination of knowledge, but it has limits on its uses and its reach. Despite the increased availability of the internet and increased digital literacy, there's still a significant segment of the population who, due to a variety of circumstances, is technologically disenfranchised. The primary goal of community archaeology is to promote collaborative narratives with community members and to engage, especially with those who have not otherwise be interested or invested in archaeology and those who have been excluded from archaeological practices and narratives. In many instances, those who are excluded from the archaeological discussion have significant overlap with those who are excluded from web-based interactions due to issues of access like economics, location, and lack of facilitation. Community archaeology seeks to address these exclusions and include and empower voices of those who would otherwise be unheard or silenced. This is Elizabeth Bollwerk's digital engagement spectrum. It is a scale, and it is not prescriptive or qualitative, but instead it is attempting to demonstrate the variety of methods possible for digital engagement on a sliding scale. She has defined 4 distinct types of digital engagement and their purposes, while acknowledging that there are projects, methodologies that may fall between categories or into multiple categories simultaneously. Today, I will be discussing these categories in relation to Cyprus. Publicity. The term publicity may evoke ideas of PR catastrophes and power suits, but many definitions of publicity emphasize marketing and spreading of knowledge of a person, event, or product. For archaeology and cultural heritage more broadly, the digital form of publicity can take place on social media, in newsletters, on websites, as well as in more academic settings like journals and conferences. In these contexts, the product being marketed is archaeology itself or archaeological knowledge. These methods are considered unidirectional because despite the appearance of democratic discourse on social media, for example, archaeologists still use their traditional credentials and metrics to demonstrate their own authority. And thus these conversations still mimic traditional top-down models of knowledge dissemination. An example of this digital broadcasting comes from the Troodos Archaeological and Environmental Survey Project, or TASP. TASP was conducted from 2000 to 2004 in the northern foothills of the Troodos Mountains in central Cyprus. The findings were published in 2013 and were wide-ranging, examining the interaction between humans and the natural environment from the Neolithic to the present, using archaeological, anthropological, and geomorphological techniques. While these findings were published in a traditional printed monograph format, the raw data was also published in a database that is available for free online. This digital access is available in 2 formats. The first is a digital appendix to an article in Internet Archaeology entitled Joining the Dots, Continuous Survey, Routine Practice, and the Interpretation of the Cypriot Landscape. As you can see, the image on the left is the first page of the database. I selected pottery finds, and then under chronotype, I chose Bronze Age, and the image all the way to the right shows all of the pottery finds dated to the Bronze Age. The second way of accessing this data digitally is through a digital repository, Archaeological Data Service. This website is a sister service to Internet Archaeology, allowing the articles published there to be integrated and multi-layered. ADS is open access, meaning all material deposited there is available without charge, and also works to maintain long-term preservation of digital material so that it will remain accessible as technology advances. Here, all of TASP's data can be downloaded, as well as associated metadata and usage statistics. The website is much more utilitarian than what is provided in the Internet Archaeology article, and all of the raw data has to be downloaded, unlike in the article where it can simply be viewed. Open access describes the practice of providing unrestricted access to scholarly material, and TASP's open access to their data is part of a larger movement in academia that is increasingly concerned with the dissemination of findings beyond the closed loops of academia and without paywalls. Open access, however, is not synonymous with inclusion. Archaeologists, geologists, computer scientists, metallurgy specialists, ceramic specialists, architects, and geobotanists all participated in TASP and are all academically accredited or trained, thus earning their authority from a powerful and traditional source. Together, they collected and curated the data and made it available to the public. They are not necessarily challenged to engage with anyone beyond these traditional sources of authority, simply by virtue of free access. While there is a possibility for diverse narratives to be born from this raw data, now that it is freely available, it is not an inherently active process that requires re-examination of traditional power structures or models of authority. Participatory. The second category in Bollwerk's model is participatory. Now, crowdsourcing is probably the most common digital practice to fall under this category. Usually these projects are focused on data collection as opposed to interpretation. Crowdsourcing can create a wider user base, make the collection, the organization, and the analysis of data more transparent. It can also increase awareness of the project, but to quote Bollwerk, the structure of the relationships between researchers and participants still follows a traditional model of specialist teaching the enthusiast or amateur, end quote. Crowdsourcing can take many forms and have varying degrees of engagement. Take this crowdsourced 3D model of Soli's amphitheater, for example. This 3D model was created from images sourced from social media, specifically drone footage that had been posted to YouTube. Soli is located in the occupied territories of Cyprus, and so access is not possible. This is one example of archaeological material that is inaccessible, whether this is due to political reasons such as at Soli or natural ones. And using non-specialist data collection can create new material that can be consumed broadly. Compare that more passive engagement through social media with the MicroPass project, which is a free open source crowdsourcing platform with the intention of acting for archaeology, history, and other cultural heritage related projects. Each crowdsourcing task on the MicroPass platform is undertaken by multiple participants and then consolidated by a traditional researcher. But the raw data, which was generated by the participants, as well as the data verified by the traditional researcher, is released on the website using a Creative Commons license. One completed project facilitated by MicroPass is the transcription and georeferencing of the National Bronze Age Index, which was the card catalogue for the British Museum's Bronze Age collection. It contained approximately 30,000 handwritten cards documenting artifacts found in Britain in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and is now completely digitized and available on the Portable Antiquities Scheme website. An ongoing project that is currently utilizing MicroPass asks participants to trace the outlines of Bronze Age axes from East Anglia. This is designed to aid in and speed the process of creating 3D models, as well as to help create typologies. MicroPass represents a more hands-on approach to crowdsourcing than the Soli project. Instead of mining social media, MicroPass actively engages the public in the creation of datasets. This variety within a single category of Bollwerk's model demonstrates the breadth of practices and the creativity that can be applied to engagement. Collaborative. In her chapter entitled simply Community Archaeology, Yvonne Marshall points out there is a difference between an archaeological project where the non-academic professional community is involved at every level and a project that is commissioned and paid for by a community. Bollwerk makes the same distinction when defining this category collaborative, and the following category, co-creative, stating that community members in a collaborative project are consulted in the development of higher level goals and project design, but that the archaeologist still remains the power of ultimate decision making. It is important to mention that a value judgment is not being placed on these different categories. The choice to use a collaborative or co-creative approach can be influenced by the needs, interests, capabilities, and unique goals of the community and archaeologist. That choice does not indicate that something is more or less community archaeology. Nikitari, telling the story of home, is a story map associated with the Pathways to Heritage, Community Heritage and Archaeology movement in the Adelphi Forest, Cyprus, or PATH, and was developed by Dr. Aaron Gibson of Glasgow University. Nikitari is a village in the Nicosia district of Cyprus on the edge of the Adelphi State Forest, and the project used a variety of methods to investigate the attachment of Nikitari residents to the abandoned village of Asinu, which lies within the forest boundaries. Asinu Church is also a significant focal point in the area. I've also included a picture of it on a stamp here, just to further demonstrate the church's place in the national and local psyche. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, part of the Painted Churches of Cyprus group, and it is located near Nikitari. The church is visited by approximately 30,000 tourists a year, drawn by the wall paintings, which give their name to the painter, the Asinu master. The church also remains open prior to the pandemic for worship, and thousands of baptisms occur there annually. The church has also been the subject of many academic studies, including a monograph and a 3D modeling project. The academic interest and the influence of international recognition associated with UNESCO designation and the corresponding tourism are reflected in Gibson's initial survey of the local residents. Asinu Church proved to be a physical and spiritual focal point in the lives of the locals. In her preliminary, semi-structured interviews, it was specifically mentioned by more than half of the project participants, while only 3 referred to villages such as the abandoned village of Asinu, which shares its name with the church, or pathways through the forest, seasonal settlements, or other evidence of human activity within or even along the boundaries of the forest. This absence of proprietariness or even memories of the forest is in no small part due to the clearance policies of the British colonial government throughout the 20th century. Gibson's objective for this website was to demonstrate how the local community could foster new connections between the school children, the abandoned village of Asinu, and with the forest itself, in turn creating feelings of communal identity and belonging. The project goals were co-developed with Kyriakos Alexandrou, president of the Nikitari Community Council, and the resulting story map is both aesthetically pleasing and user-friendly. It is created using the GIS software called Esri, which creates a clickable geo-referenced map. Each location of interest on the map is indicated, and clicking on it leads to further, often multimedia content. It includes information gathered through Gibson's doctoral research and data, especially archaeological, generated by TASP. The story map also contains contributions from the Nikitari Women's Group, the Nikitari Youth Group, and Elder Panagiotis Alexandrou Lopos. These contributions come in the form of interviews, videos of traditional practices, and descriptions of religious life. Especially important are the interviews and informal conversations with Elder Panagiotis Lopos, as well as the local primary school children's field trips and interactions with Mr. Lopos. All of this is documented on the website through pictures, video, and text. At Asinu, the village, there is archaeological evidence from the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, though historical records, including tax registers, attest to its foundation in the 16th century. Until the 1940s, the area continued to be used by shepherds, including Mr. Lopos's family, who grazed their goats there. However, by 1950, most of the inhabitants had moved to Nikitari or further afield, and with some exceptions, collective and individual memory of life in the village, and indeed of the village itself, began to fade. By 2016, when Gibson began this project, Mr. Lopos was the only person remaining in Nikitari with memories of life within the forest. His connection with the land and his sense of ownership over it and its past are an interesting complement to the official heritage narrative that is embodied by Asinu Church and its UNESCO status. Gibson spent 21 hours between 2016 and 2018 in structured and semi-structured interviews, site visits, car rides, and walks through the landscape with Mr. Lopos. His great-grandfather was a shepherd, as were his grandparents and his parents. Mr. Lopez carried on the tradition, flouting land use laws, and grazed his goats within the forest, physically resisting the policies of clearance and maintaining physical and spiritual connections with the land. In the early 1990s, he was persuaded to take a job with the forestry department as a fire watchman in return for selling his goats, and so repurposed his knowledge, both geographic and historic. Through recording Mr. Lopez's stories, facilitating opportunities for him to share them with students, as well as recording traditional heritage practices within the village, Gibson was able to create the story map and website. Recording this connection to an archaeologically relevant place whose modes of living were explicitly and successfully oppressed. In this way, this story map is acting as a digital memory archive. Gibson had profound and sustained interactions with the communities of Nikitaré and was in close consultation with them in terms of what they wanted to share and demonstrate about the life in the town and how that impacted their relationship with the village of Asinu and the forest. But the end product, Nikitaré telling the story of home, exists within this same framework of academic output and unidirectional communication, keeping it firmly in the collaborative category. It is ultimately provided through traditional structures of academic knowledge dissemination, as opposed to created in democratic collaboration. Co-creative. So we come to the final category. Co-creative projects are those where community members are involved in all aspects of the creation and dissemination of design and implementation. Neil Faulkner says that, quote, archaeology from below is not just about making heritage as an active process, belonging to the people whose past it is, but achieving a truly scientific discipline where active knowledge creation replaces standardized data collection, where material, method, and meaning interpenetrate in dialectical tension, end quote. In a digital context, that dialectical tension occurs as the content and data is being organized and used while attempting to cater to the needs of different communities who in turn use their own experiences and worldviews to categorize, to organize, and to interact with the material. Co-creative projects cannot rely on traditional archaeological frameworks of organization and interpretation because the likelihood that these will suit all stakeholders are slim. Instead, according to Bollwerk, a co-creative project will provide communities with ways to create their own organization and data management schemes, as well as pursuing the bottom-up model described by Faulkner in terms of the creation of said data. Bollwerk also notes that flexibility is paramount in this regard. Not every model will suit every scenario. However, the barriers to developing co-creative projects are often structural. Bonacci says that co-creative digital interactions pose the most challenges to initiate, and that this is due in large part to funding. There are very few funding bodies which allow for proposals that are not supported and driven by existing organizations, be that universities, museums, private archaeology, or CRM firms. Similarly, few funding opportunities allow for the flexibility that is necessary for bottom-up or grassroots projects. You will notice I do not have an example for this category, and that is in part because of Cyprus's archaeological tradition. Cyprus does not have the long history of community engagement that we see in Great Britain and Ireland, for example, where there are many local historical and archaeological societies, some of which can date their founding from the 19th century. Similarly, does not have the same reclamation of archaeological narratives that have been embodied in American and Australian Indigenous archaeology movements. However, archaeology never occurs in a vacuum. So while methodologies surrounding community work are beginning to emerge, projects such as that at Athenaeum Malura, sponsored by Davidson College, has had long-standing ties with the local community in which it works, creating a symbiotic relationship that benefits the residents and the archaeologists in equal measure. In this way, the archaeologists are engaging community work in a natural and organic way, demonstrating their commitment to the community through actions that go beyond archaeological practice. So in conclusion, all digital interactions, wherever they fall on Bollwerk's scale, face difficulties not dissimilar to those faced by in-person interactions. As with in-person interactions, accessibility is a major issue. And expanding availability is hindered by lack of physical access, in this case, physical access to appropriate software and hardware, as well as digital capabilities and interest levels. No technological development is going to, of its own accord, create equity and inclusion. Without conscious and deliberate consideration and effort by the people and organizations behind the screens, these advancements do little to further equitable archaeological practice. It requires more than just building new gadgets and platforms. It requires sustained, active work and the flexibility to adjust as the needs of the community shift. These digital creations can act as tools of community archaeology, but cannot create a co-creative, democratic, community-oriented project on their own. The individuals and organizations behind the screens have to mobilize themselves towards these goals as well. Just like archaeology, technology does not exist in a vacuum. It needs to be integrated into a larger praxis that considers questions such as accessible for who, inclusive of whom, and in what way. How we choose to address these questions is paramount to the continuation of archaeology as a discipline, and perhaps more importantly, to the quality of life we can help provide for our fellow humans. Thank you.